Hello, everyone. Welcome into Above My Pay Grade. My name is Eric, and I have a special guest with me today, Brian DeMint. Am I saying your last name correctly?
That's correct. Yes.
All right. Well, I guessed it correct. He is the author of Bitcoin Evangelism. You can find it on Amazon. I will link it down in the description of the video below. But he would be somebody I would call a Bitcoin expert. Brian, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I appreciate the kind words. The cool thing about you call me a Bitcoin expert. I mean, I wrote a book on it, but it's you don't have to be in Bitcoin for that long. It's a new industry, and so you could be in Bitcoin for year, 2 years, and you're an expert, right? As long as you've gone down that rabbit hole. We were just talking off air about that, and so if you put in the time, you put in the work, you're going to be in the top 1% of people that understand this stuff. The truth is that Bitcoin, even when it gets mass adoption and everybody's using it, still only some people, only a minority of people will actually understand it. Those that understand it are going to be able to harness its value the best. The example I would use is look back to the internet. Most people don't understand how TCP IP works or SMTP servers work or any of the internet protocols work. We use them, right? So we use the tools of the internet, but look at the people that understood it. Jeff Bezos. I'm not saying these people are moral characters to emulate, but as far as the way that they harness the value of it, the Jeff Bezos, the Elon Musks, and you know, again, Bill Gates, any of those people, right? They understood the value at the time. And so, I mean, we can get into the nuance of why we want good moral people to take the reins on these things. But if you were one of the early adopters of the internet, you're sending people into outer space today. Like that's how far along in the game that you are. And same thing with Bitcoin. I think that eventually everybody's going to use it. I think it's going to get to the point when you send value anywhere in the world, your grandpa's going to be using Bitcoin and he's just not going to realize it. He's just going to realize that his bill got paid or, that sort of thing. So anyways, all that to say, yes, I guess you could say, cause I've been in Bitcoin for about 10 years. I'm an expert. I've taken the time, I've done my homework. And I'm continuing to learn though. If anybody tells you that they're an expert and they've got like all the answers and that they're not, Bitcoin is an evolving thing. The protocol is not changing, but as far as our understanding of how it's used in the world and new developments on top of it, like Lightning Network, we have to be in a state of learning. So I invite people that to not be intimidated by that, but just be welcoming in to understand that if you want to learn about Bitcoin, be humble, come in and just have an open mind.
Yes, I agree. I think a lot of people, like a lot of the words you just use, like protocol, a lot of people, especially older people that didn't grow up with the internet, they're like, "What the heck is he talking about?" But I think, and we're going to get into this. It is a amazing invention. But if you were to give an elevator pitch to somebody who is not a digital native, doesn't understand the internet, older generation, boomer generation, they probably think that Bitcoin, like a lot of people, is just magic internet money. And there's Bitcoin and there's crypto, and we'll get into that. But what would be the elevator pitch that you'd give to somebody who has no clue about any of the technical details that you talked about, that why they would need Bitcoin?
So I think it's really important anytime we're trying to explain anything to people. If you're, in business and you want to make a good pitch to somebody, you kind of got to understand your audience a little bit. You narrowed it down for me. It's the boomer person. I found that there's like two types of boomers, and I'll give you hopefully shorter than an elevator pitch for each one of them. The first type of boomer I'll talk to is the person that doesn't like institutions, the person that doesn't like the bank, or that grandma that, doesn't trust the government or, third parties, that sort of thing. What I would say was any time in history where you wanted to transact, you had to go through third parties, right? If you wanted to use a Visa payment, if you want to use, send a wire transfer, if you want to send an ACH payment to pay your bill, through with checks, you're relying on a third party. So it's not just me sending it to you. There's always somebody in between. And beyond that, there's usually 5 parties involved. So actually, if I'm going to send, for example, a Venmo payment to you, or we can just say Western Union payment, something that speaks to their language, there's usually 5 parties involved. So there's me, I'm saying I want to send it. There's my originating bank, Wells Fargo. Then there's Western Union. there's you with your receiving bank, and then finally you. So in that one transaction, there's 5 parties. Bitcoin is person to person. There's only a computer algorithm. I wouldn't use the word algorithm. There's just a computer in between that says, if I send this from A to B, B receives it. That's it. That's it. No third party. And so that sometimes can shine a little bit of light on the profound nature, because we've never been able to send electronic payments without a third party. We've always needed Visa. We've always needed MasterCard. We've always needed somebody else. But those companies have been sued for billions of dollars for colluding against their customers, for all these different dangerous, just terrible things. And so it's nice to be able to remove those third parties from transactions. So I would use just the shortened version of that to the boomer. The second type of boomer, my mom, who was like a gold bug type boomer, what I would tell to her is, do you know how many pieces of gold there are in the world? She would say, I don't know. I say, well, guess what? Yeah, gold is scarce, but we don't really know how much there is. With Bitcoin, I can tell you with surgical precision how many Bitcoin there are in the world today. There's about 19 million. I could give you an exact answer if you wanted it. And there will only ever be 21 million. It's programmed into the code. It cannot be changed. And so if the person likes scarcity and they see that the problem is, with our fiat currency, they say, oh, wow, inflation is going through the roof because the government keeps printing it. That would be my pitch to them, would be scarcity. If it's somebody that doesn't trust third parties, I would talk about how Bitcoin removes third parties.
Yeah, I think that's a great, keeps printing it is on the eve of the debt ceiling. I think that we just reached it today. I think people are slowly waking up, because what I tell people, why we're seeing the problems economically, is we were on a path, an unsustainable path. We were going towards the cliff, and we hit the gas pedal when COVID happened. And so if we would have kept going, it would have been slower. But now we're literally over the cliff on our way down, about to hit. And so far, so good until we hit the ground. And so I tell people, if you look at history, this isn't a new phenomena. It's not. It's not new to the United States, and it provides such gross incentives to have this money printer for politicians, to have money attached to the state. That's another thing I tell people is, if you don't trust it, or you don't trust third parties, if you think there's some kind of political football going around with your money, you're correct if you have that feeling. But Bitcoin itself, can bypass that by being person to person. Now, the innovation of Bitcoin, that's what I want to get into, because a lot of people say, okay, cool, I can send money person to person. I can do that with Venmo, so they say. But I always say, money is a ledger system. If you look on your bank, it says pending for a reason, because it's going from one ledger to another. It's not, they're just subtracting from one ledger and adding to another. And that's what Bitcoin is, but it's secured cryptographically. But what makes it unique in the fact, why can't make Bitcoin 2.0, because it's open source? Why wouldn't I be able to do that?
Well, you can, in the sense that it's open source software, so you can copy it. But why that second version of it really doesn't matter is because it's about the network effect. So if nobody's using my, Brian coin, my copy of Bitcoin, then it doesn't really matter. The thing that's powerful, when I'm talking to you, or I'm talking to people that know about Bitcoin, and we're sitting down talking about the profound nature of what makes Bitcoin important. So not my elevator pitch to boomers, or not my elevator pitch, but when I'm talking to people that they're kind of getting it a little bit, or they've gotten it, or I'm talking to somebody that's a veteran or whatever, decentralization is the fundamental revolution in Bitcoin. It's because when you're talking about the ledgers before, bank ledger A, bank ledger B, it's ledger A is subtracting $50, ledger B is adding $50 to it. It's two different people's ledgers, but they really control those internally once the funds are there. With Bitcoin, everybody uses one ledger, and all the entries go on that ledger, and it's visible to everybody. It's transparent. It's the exact opposite of what the Federal Reserve is. The Federal Reserve, the people that control monetary policy for literally the entire world, like, you think that's crazy? You listen to a Fed governor's meeting, and the Fed chairman says something kind of hawkish or something like that, kind of negative, and markets across the world take, trillions of dollars of losses, that's a centrally planned government. And so when you have that system, the Federal Reserve in 1913 was when it was created by Congress. It's in the law that it's supposed to be audited regularly. Since 1913, it has been audited 0 times. Bitcoin, on the other hand, to talk about its transparency, gets audited every 10 minutes. There's not a 10-minute period that goes by where Bitcoin is not audited by anybody in the world. If you want to audit it right now, you can. But the computers that are running Bitcoin are constantly auditing it. They're checking other people on the network to make sure there's no bad actors. And it susses out the bad actors, that anybody that would try to forge the network or try to make a fraudulent transaction. All other nodes meaning computers running the software, they would suss that out. So anyways, that's the fundamental difference between bank ledgers, which are internally kept and it's opaque, nobody can see it, and the Bitcoin ledger, where literally anybody can see it at any time.
Now, is this a correct? Is the more nodes there are, the more secure the Bitcoin network is? Is that correct?
Yeah. So there's nodes, and then there's miners. So you could have a mining node. A node just means it's somebody that keeps track of all the transactions in Bitcoin. You can run a node without mining Bitcoin too. So you could just say, okay, I want to be able to check the network. I want to be able to audit it. I want to be able to make sure transactions go. You can check Bitcoin transactions without running your own node, but you could say, morally, I want to be one of the keepers of the ledger to, like we talked about earlier, to add to the decentralization. If I'm running a node in my household, that means that there's one more point that needs to fail for Bitcoin to fail itself. There's nodes all over the world. Multiple atomic bomb strikes on every major city in the world wouldn't destroy Bitcoin, because there would be nodes running in farmhouses and in basements and all that kind of stuff. Every node that's on the network makes it incrementally stronger. And so that's morally why maybe somebody would, or ideally why somebody would want to run a node. You could do it without mining Bitcoin. But if you've heard the term, for your listeners that have heard the term mining Bitcoin and don't know what it is, it means that those are computers that are processing the transactions. And in order to get computers to volunteer their computing power, their hash power, in order to get them to volunteer that, they get little bits of Bitcoin or lots of bits of Bitcoin in return for doing so. So there's those two types of things. There's miners, and then there's just node operators. Both add to the decentralization of Bitcoin.
And that's another reason why Bitcoin 2.0 would have a hard time competing, is because it's the network of Bitcoin. It's kind of came in Trojan horse style, because the U.S. government doesn't like it, but no government probably likes competing currency.
Yeah.
But the more nodes and the more decentralized it is, the harder it is to shut down. But when Bitcoin first started, my understanding, it would have been a lot easier to sabotage it, with no one knowing about it, maybe a couple nodes running. But since it's so decentralized now, you have all these verifying nodes around the world that it's a lot harder to attack. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, it would be almost physically impossible to attack it at the scale that it would need to be attacked for anything significant to happen, because the sheer volume of computing power is more than entire countries would be able to wage against the Bitcoin network. It's so distributed. So there's so much financial incentive for people to preserve the network and make sure it doesn't get messed with. It would take hundreds of billions of dollars of resources and man hours and all that kind of stuff. But the interesting thing that is, as people are attacking it, if a government wants to attack it, until the point where they actually get enough power to break the network, and I'll explain what that means in a second. It's not that big of a break. If they were to, what we call it, a 51% attack, if you were to get 51% of the computing power for the network, you could then start to do things with the network. You would have to spend billions of dollars to do that. You would spend all that time and resource and everything. I mean, I don't know how anybody would get the amount of chips for that. There's already chip shortages for cars and things like that. So somebody would have to secretly start creating chips by the billions, right? And maybe governments could collude to do that. But up until the point where they take 51% of the hash power, they would actually be, this is where theory comes in, they would be making the network stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger, because as they're adding hash power, just anytime you hear me say hash power, it just means computing power. As they're adding hash power to the network, all the other miners, remember, they make money by securing the network, by how much hash power they give. Well, if competition comes online for that hash power, the existing miners will also ramp up their hash power in order to keep their business going. They have a competitive incentive to ramp up their hash power. So it would become incrementally, actually like exponentially more expensive bad actors to hack the network. And let's say the United States, China, and Russia, enemies, people that are not on the same page, but they are the only ones with maybe the resources to do this. Say they all colluded to attack Bitcoin. They could perform a 51% attack. All that would do is it would mean that the next 10 minutes, they could make sure that the next block of transactions, that there's actually no transactions in that. It's called the denial of service. So all that means is that they would slow down transactions on the Bitcoin network. But the next 10 minutes, when all the good miners mine the next block Bitcoin, then transactions would flow again. So basically every 10 minutes, every other 10 minutes, that you could stop transactions. You would significantly slow down the network, but you can't take everybody's money. It's not like, I think that's a misnomer about 51% attacks. If anybody's kind of learned a little bit about them, even if you quote unquote hack the network, it doesn't mean you can drain everybody's wallet. That's not how it works. The best thing you could do is deny transactions for a few minutes.
Yeah, I think that's going to confuse every boomer.
Yeah, sorry, boomers.
But I think that, like you said at the beginning, you don't have to understand how the internet works. You know, it's useful, and we're going to get into the moral case for Bitcoin, which is really what I like to focus on with people. Is like, hey, if you ask the moral question, what is money, and then how money can be distorted, that's really where a lot of governments get their power from. And so, I'm in the military. I asked the question, how long would we have been in Afghanistan if we didn't have a money printer? Would we have gone to Iraq without a money printer? If on your taxes it said war fund minus 1,000, whatever it was, you got taxed and you see it every year, would people be paying more attention? You know what I mean? And so there's a lot of bad that goes into fiat currency being, government-based currency. But I have had people on my channel, and this is maybe a crackpot theory, but I'd love to see how you dissuade it. How do you know it's not controlled by like a government? Like it wasn't invented. Some people say it was invented by the CIA, and I don't think it was, but I can't necessarily give them hard evidence that it wasn't.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, it wasn't invented by the CIA. It was invented by the NSA. So it's even worse. So it actually, and so when you hear that, and this is where it's important that Bitcoiners don't shy away from this, the hashing algorithm, SHA-256, which is the cryptographic algorithm that Bitcoin uses, was in fact invented by the NSA. And so that should send off alarm bells. I mean, that should really scare people. And so I understand why it does. When I first heard that, I'm like, I got to do the deep dive. Like that, to me, that's proof right there, right? That this is all a scam. Because if this government entity, maybe the worst one of them all, or maybe, sorry, I didn't say worst one of them all. Excuse me. Sorry, anybody that's listening from the NSA.
they're all tied.
But anyways, so let me try to explain this. In cryptography, if you and me are sending a message and I write a letter to you, and we encrypt it, so maybe the letter doesn't really make any sense, but you and me know the cipher, which is like the key, the cryptographic key. I tell you that every third letter in this letter is actually what you want to write down. Then I could be able to send a message. So even if it gets intercepted, nobody else could take it. Knowing the key to the cipher is really important. So that's why people get worried. They say, well, the NSA created it, so they must know what the cryptographic keys are for Bitcoin. Let me try to explain as simply as possible. But just so you know, there's no problem with the NSA having invented that one algorithm that Bitcoin uses. It's called the one-way hashing algorithm. What it means is Bitcoin is cryptographic but there's not one key. There's not a key that unlocks all of Bitcoin, or there's not a key that unlocks everybody's wallet. There's not a master key anywhere. That's the misnomer. What SHA-256 does, all it does is every 10 minutes, it generates a random number. And then that's what the Bitcoin miners are trying to do. When you hear hash power, just think of hash power as guessing power. A Bitcoin miner is guessing. It's a giant game of pick a number between 1 and 10, but that number is almost infinitely large. It's such a complicated number that trillions of guesses per second is probably not fast enough to guess this number within 10 minutes. So all the computers around the world are trying to guess this number. So SHA-256, the thing that the NSA invented, was just an algorithm that can generate random numbers. That's all that is. So if you hear that story that the NSA invented it, they invented a mathematical algorithm that can generate random numbers. That's it.
I actually have a little deeper question than on Bitcoin mining. If it's random, how, let's say you're running mining operations are very difficult because you don't control, it's hard to control input costs, and profit can be up and down, right? But how, let's say there's two miners, just two miners in the world, both running, taking guesses. Is it always a 50-50 chance? Or, so in other words, somebody could land on heads every single time and solve the problem? Or is it kind of distributed?
It's all statistically based. So if you have 1% of the hash power in the world, over the course of a year, you're going to mine 1% of all the Bitcoin statistically. Now, you and I, you can write that algorithm I was just talking about. You can do it by hand. Now, you probably wouldn't be able to do it in 10 minutes, so you wouldn't be able to even make one guess within. But let's say you could do this algorithm really quick and make one guess of the number in 10 minutes. Theoretically, one guess, just like one lottery ticket, could win the lottery. I mean, you could think of the Bitcoin mining as a giant lottery. There's a number out there, and these computers are trying to guess it. And so, yeah, anybody theoretically could guess it in one guess. Now, such a large number, like, I mean, you're talking about the amount of atoms in the universe, big type number. I mean, it's a massive, massive number. So the amount of hash power, for anybody that cares, the amount of guesses per second that miners do around the world is about 280 nonillion guesses per second. So it's like if quadrillion is the fourth illion, it's like the seventh illion is how many 280 nonillion guesses per second. It's a massive number. So imagine you had 280 million or nonillion guesses per second, and it still takes you 10 minutes for somebody to guess that. That's kind of how it works. So,
okay. Yeah. Huh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that that's how it was distributed as far as who gets what, or who solves what. So I was watching, you probably heard about the Peter Zahan, Joe Rogan. I don't know if you heard about it. Did you hear
no,
him
so
talking about
I
Bitcoin?
watched a lot of Rogan. I didn't hear. I don't know who that is though. The other guy.
So anyways, he talks about geopolitics, but he talked about Bitcoin, and there was a lot of people on Twitter that were talking about what a dummy he was.
Oh, he was
But
the guy who was negative towards Bitcoin.
correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
I saw
Yeah.
clips. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a couple things he brought up that I'd love to hear your thoughts on. One, he talks about intrinsic value, and I always ask people what backs gold, because the monetary gold, right? Because people like it in jewelry, but like what, it's just a rock, or silver, it's just a rock. Why is that more a better rock than the rock you can go get out in your backyard? And people think about it, oh, it's rare, it takes work to get out of the ground, yada yada yada. And that's what gives gold value, and that's what gives Bitcoin value. Now, I said keep in mind, uh, you may not think it's valuable at all, but there's millions of people around the world that do. So, just like gold, you may not think it's valuable at all. The people that hate it. But what would be your answer that gives, if you were to say, what's the intrinsic value of Bitcoin? A lot of people are like, well, you can't value it because stocks, you can say future cash flows, yada, yada, yada. How do you answer that question?
It is a good question. The Austrian economic answer is that nothing has value, nothing has intrinsic value, and that it's like you said, it's only what people value it as. I mean, you think about intrinsic value, water has intrinsic value, gallon of water has a lot of intrinsic value. Without, if you go without it for a couple of days, you die. A diamond, a rare 1 carat diamond, is worth thousands and thousands of dollars. It has no utility other than beholder value, right? Social status, or you're going to impress a woman, or whatever it happens to be. So there's these kind of tangential values, but you can't consume a diamond. It's not like sustaining your life. So that's the Austrian economics answer, is that nothing has intrinsic value. And so what I would say is the kind of logical next step. And so in my book, I actually have a whole chapter devoted to Bitcoin's intrinsic value. I think that people aren't satisfied with the Austrian. I subscribe to the Austrian school of economics for a lot of things. And so I just don't think that people are satisfied by the answer. So yeah, I have a whole chapter in my book about this. But I think that it really depends on the individual. If you were a Canadian trucker in January 2021, and you were trying to protest, use free speech, protest the mandates that were going on in Canada, when you had donations sent to you and your bank account was frozen, but then Bitcoin donations came in and you were able to buy fuel and buy food and all those things, censorship resistant money all of a sudden was very, very valuable to you. It had an intrinsic or an inherent value to you if you were a Canadian trucker in January of 2021. If I'm in war-torn Uganda and I want to take all of my valuables with me, but I can't carry them, and if I put coins in my pocket, chances are they're going to get stolen. Or even if I come across the police are probably going to ask for a bribe. With Bitcoin, I can store those in my head, and I could, if I was, say you're not in Uganda, maybe if Bitcoin had existed and you were a Jewish Pole in 1939, you could have taken all of your value with you and fled, as opposed to being robbed by Nazi, stormtroopers and things like that. So there's intrinsic value to certain types of people. To me, to you, I think to liberty-minded people, that's really important. Money that you can't mess with. I think that is intrinsically valuable. And I would say that I think the gold has value. I grew up in a gold bug family. And like you said, the fact that with dollar bills, there's no work required. And so there's no limiting factor to how much it can be produced. At least gold, I know for more gold to be produced, somebody has to expend time and energy and all that kind of stuff. So there's something that limits how much gold can come in. So if I hold a pile of gold, I know that the percentage of gold that I hold in the world is probably not going to change that much from day to day. But if I have $100 in my hand, that $100 is a less and less percentage of all the dollars in existence every single day. And there's no way for me to know. So that's one of the values of gold. But what Bitcoin goes beyond with, that idea that makes gold valuable is that you still don't really know how much gold is in the world. But like I said earlier, with Bitcoin, you know exactly how much gold is in the world. And it's actually even more gold than gold. So you think about gold. I don't know. I haven't checked the price of gold. I always say it's like $1,800 an ounce. I don't know what it's at. It's always around there. Let's say gold goes from $1,800 an ounce to $10,000 an ounce. There's just a rush on gold in the next 2 weeks, and everybody's going crazy for gold. Well, guess what? Gold producers already have a lot in their vaults that they're going to put on the market. That's going to suppress the price. Gold miners, say they sell all the gold in their vaults and that doesn't suppress the price, people still want it. They will be financially incentivized to go produce more gold. And so they're going to extract more gold out of the ground and they're going to put more gold on the market. With Bitcoin, it doesn't matter how incentivized Bitcoin miners are. The price of Bitcoin could go to $2 million tomorrow. Bitcoin miners can't mine any more Bitcoin every 10 minutes than is already pre-programmed. There will only be 6.25 Bitcoin that come out every 10 minutes, no matter how much more Bitcoin miners want to mine it. But with gold miners can extract as much gold out of the ground as they want. So gold is better than fiat, but Bitcoin is better than gold in that respect. So yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of reasons that I think you can place really good value on Bitcoin. I mean, I would just say this too. I'll try to make the last point on this. Digital things, there's no precedent of digital things not being exponentially more valuable than their analog incumbents. So let's look at something like paper maps. I do a whole write-up on this in my book. The paper map industry in its heyday was like a $40 million a year business. What are digital maps? What's the inherent value or what's the market value of digital maps today? It's worth hundreds of billions of dollars per year. Uber, DoorDash, Lyft, all the gig economy only exists because of digital maps. Amazon Logistics, UPS Logistics, all of those companies' logistics only exist because of digital maps. Your car, every car has a digital map in it. I don't drive without my map on to tell me where police are or tell me where traffic is. I use the digital map every day. Paper maps, your family may have pulled it out when you were doing your annual family trip to plot your course, like your Thomas guide or whatever. You'd pull it out. You'd use it one time a year, and it had very little value. When you make something digital, it's always exponentially more valuable. What was the value of encyclopedias versus what is the market cap of Google today? Google is exponentially more valuable because it's way more useful. Instead of going through an entire encyclopedia, I can actually just ask Google the question and it'll give me the answer. It might be a censored answer, but it's going to be an answer nonetheless. And so I would just say that about money. Money has never been digital. Fiat currency, gold, all those things are analog money. Even though we have like Venmo and stuff, that's still not digitally native. Those are physically native assets that they've kind of given a digital shell to. Bitcoin is digitally native. So there's no case study in history where the digital thing isn't going to be exponentially more valuable than the incumbent that it replaced.
Never thought about it that way. That's a good point. I think another thing I always like to remind people of, a lot of people that watch this channel, they understand, I try not to tell people, talk about Bitcoin as an investment. I talk about it as a freedom technology, which therefore I think it is a natural, in the free market, is going to gain value. But I try to talk about the problem we're in. And a lot of people, they don't even, they're falling, and so far so good. We haven't hit the ground yet. But we are in this place where they're slowly realizing it, that, hey, wait a second, we have inflation, and then they hear things in the news like debt ceiling, and they're like, I wonder what's going to happen. And they've heard about this debt ceiling before, and it always goes up. Why does it always go up?
Yeah. That ceiling is really flexible. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it's slow and it's insidious and it's gross, unfortunately, like how inflation slowly takes your purchasing power away. But that's kind of what I try to tell people. It's like money is productivity. And at least that's what it should represent. And so if you print it, you are devaluing productivity. And so you go to work to earn these green pieces of paper, and those literally could have been manifested out of thin air. But one of the things that Peter Zahan talked about, and then also, do you know who George Gammon is? Have you ever heard of him?
Yeah. I've listened to George Gammon quite a bit.
So he's talked about this often, about a fixed money system being an issue because, and it is true in history, fractional reserve lending, not the kind we have today, but fractional reserve lending came out of the free market and this, what do they call it? That free banking system before we had a national currency. Because the theory is, if you do not have an expanding money supply, then you will not have loans being handed out at nearly as low of an interest rate. And therefore people can't take as many risks, because if the money's fixed, you're going to pay 20% to start a new business, if not more, if you need a loan. So how would you answer the question for people who are advocates of, Bitcoin is a good technology, but we cannot have a fixed money? Do you see Bitcoin as a money, or do you see it as a savings technology, digital gold? How do you see it in that realm?
Yeah, I see it as money. And I think that, I think it would give people, if you're starting a business, you should probably analyze it more. I know a lot of people that have started businesses and they didn't do the proper due diligence before they started the business, and their economics of their business model didn't work out, and they were getting 6% interest or 7% interest. The interest rate wasn't what caused them to fail. It was their bad business plan. If you have to take out a business loan at 20% interest, which is actually what I did when I started my business in 2008, because I was a 22-year-old that just graduated college. I had a little bit of cash and I put the rest of my business on a credit card, and nobody wanted to loan me money. So like 17% interest rate loans and stuff. I think that, but we had a good business plan. We had, here we are 14 years later, by the grace of God, the business has worked out. I think that it will force businesses, people that want to start a business, to really evaluate it. Any business that's worth starting, it should outpace a 20% interest rate on a loan. That would just be my answer to that. If you want 20% interest, then, that, or 10% interest or something, say, smaller, you can invest in the stock market. Your capital can do well. And, if you invested in the stock market the last 10 years or whatever, you would have done more than 20% interest. Starting a business should be targeted for somebody that's doing an enterprise where the returns are 10x, 15x, 20x. So you're talking about thousands of percent return. I think that a fixed money supply system actually forces people to make wiser decisions with their finances. And yes, so the system we live in right now is a debt system. And so I think that's why it's hard it would be painful to make a switch for a lot of people, because going from a debt system to, it's just the same as going from like a really bad diet to a really good diet. Like, that's going to feel painful for a while, but it's the healthier thing. I think GDP would actually slow significantly, and economists won't like that. But I think people will be more cautious with the way that they spend money. And so, yeah, for economic activity, it might slow things down. But you think about how much waste we have in our expenses. I certainly have a lot of waste in my expenses, and I like to think of myself as somebody that's fiscally minded. And so I could certainly tighten things down. And if I had if I was in a system where the money supply wasn't expanding, I would be forced to be wiser with my money. I think that based off of the way that economics work right now, yes, it would be difficult. Based on a moral financial system, I think it's a much more moral way to do things. I think the idea of interest can actually be, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of people that believe that interest at all is an immoral thing. I don't know if I subscribe to that, but I think that a lot of people get into trouble because they can take on debt. But if you had to save up for 5 years before you started your business, then maybe we would take our businesses a little bit more seriously. So that would be my thoughts on that. So yeah, George Gammon is not wrong that could be short-term painful. But I think when you're talking about 100 years from now, I think things would be a lot better. But in the next 5 years, maybe it would be a little bit tougher.
And I also like the technology of Bitcoin, this unconfiscatable. You can't mess with it, because even if it's not adopted as a currency, it is a gut check on the current system. Because what typically economies or governments do is they ban the next best thing. So if you're in Turkey, you can't use dollars, and in America, maybe they'll outlaw it. Although that's unconstitutional, but that hasn't stopped them in the past. But I think if you have a better option, if people, you can kind of have a parallel economy that's competing. It's constantly going to keep the government in check from being, and that's what gold was supposed to do. And then they came out with paper gold. So I wonder what your thoughts is on. Do you think, they suppressed the price of gold? There's something like 100+ paper ounces of gold traded for every actual physical ounce of gold. Therefore, demand is way higher than supply, but they suppress the price by supplying that demand as paper, as traded as paper. So if everyone were to, want to redeem that, obviously that's not going to happen. But how do you think Bitcoin avoids? I know it's a lot easier to take self custody and all that, but how do we avoid like an FTX or an ETF, for instance, who is just selling paper Bitcoin?
Yeah.
Do you think we can?
Yeah. I mean, I had a gentleman I was training jiu-jitsu this morning, and he comes up to me and he asked me that question. You mentioned it right there. He said, explain FTX, that scam. Explain it to me like I'm 5 years old. And I said exactly what you said right there. I said, all they were doing was they were taking your real US dollars, telling you just bought 3 Bitcoin, but that was just their ledger saying, oh yeah, you bought Bitcoin. Nope, you didn't. They didn't have that Bitcoin for you. They didn't have any of that stuff, but they took your real dollars and they spent it on real things, except for they didn't ever buy that Bitcoin. So that when their thing collapsed, all that happened was your numbers went away on the screen. So yeah, that is something that has already happened to Bitcoin. It has been very negative. And so that's literally the mission that I'm on is education. I want people to understand the tenets of Bitcoin so that you take self-custody. If every Bitcoin holder took self-custody, there would be no room for the industry to do this type of thing. And so it's really a holdover that people don't fully maybe understand everything about Bitcoin. And so we're still giving a lot of power to these exchanges to do this kind of stuff. The way we change this is through education, through people realizing, like you said, that Bitcoin isn't an investment. Don't look at it like that. Do I think the value of it's going to go up tremendously? I actually do think it's going to go up, but that's not why I'm buying it. I'm buying it as freedom technology, exactly like what you're saying. But if we want it to do those things, if we do want it to go up in value, take it off the exchanges. There's only 19 million Bitcoin in the world. There's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin ever. There's 45 million millionaires in the world. If every millionaire wanted a Bitcoin, they couldn't have one. But if exchanges sell paper Bitcoin, if people give their Bitcoins to exchanges, to ETFs and stuff like that to hold for them, then they're going to be able to sell that paper Bitcoin. And the price isn't going to appreciate the way that all the Bitcoiners want it to. And so I think that we need to make sure that we lobby our politicians to not vote for things like ETFs and those types of regulations. And you know, I know a lot of Bitcoiners want a Bitcoin ETF, and maybe there's a healthy way to do it. If you have one-to-one backing, then yes, there's ways to ensure that. But so my long-winded answer, and I'll just repeat it because things can get lost in me saying so many things. I would say it's just a fact. It's just a matter of education. The way we fight this is through education. Like you said, gold bugs knew that, but they didn't have the ability to take self-custody, especially if you had a legitimate amount of gold. You just couldn't do it. So you had to have Brinks take it. You had to have so-and-so take it for you. With Bitcoin, it is very easy to store your own Bitcoin. You could store $10 million of Bitcoin in this big of a device. And so it's really easy to do that. It's really safe. You can make it, people are worried, oh, what if I forget my password? You can make it so that that will not be a problem. Like those types of things were early Bitcoin problems. They're not problems in Bitcoin anymore. So we're way past that. But yeah, my suggestion to everybody would be to take custody of it yourself so that you can't be part of that scam.
Yeah, and if it's freedom technology, it's freedom peer-to-peer. Not once again, you're kind of involving a bank. That's what these exchanges are, and they rehypothecate and do all kinds of shady things. And my 2 cents on it, a little off topic, but like Gensler and the SEC, we're in this middle ground where we're like, hey, we have this regulatory body that meets with a guy like Sam Bankman-Fried, so people have this like, oh, he must be on the up and up because the SEC is meeting with him. And then it turns out that gives them a false sense of confidence, and they put more money in, and biggest Ponzi, ever, except for Bernie Madoff. But it's like, either we should have zero regulations and it's free for all, or we can't have this regulatory body that is actually playing favorites and like trying to regulate based off of who lines their pockets, which is kind of gross.
Well, I don't know if you ever saw the clip, but there was a clip of after a congressional hearing, Maxine Waters was the person overseeing the committee hearing. So she was the chairman of the committee. And afterwards, she waves at him and she blows him a kiss as he's walking out. And it's just, it's so disgusting. And it's like, that shows how little they think of the voters. Because if I was doing that, if I was colluding with somebody, you better believe I'm going to be secretive about it. I don't want to rub it in everybody's face unless you think that everybody's stupid. And the people that are voting you into power are never going to either care or see this or whatever. So they're just so gross in the way that they do these things. It's right out in front. They say the quiet parts out loud because the average person just goes along with the way things are. And so I think that's what's happening. That's the blessing of COVID. COVID was this great awakening that people said, wait, what? My government doesn't have my best interest in mind. And then it gets them to question things like the things they're putting in their body, the things that their monies, all those types of things. And so I think that there's a huge blessing that's come out of this. And in the end, we're going to win. So.
Yes, that I agree with. I think that I always like to give people hope because there's a lot of bad news out there. A lot of people, the shades come off, and all of a sudden they're seeing things that they've never seen before, and like, oh, wait a second, CIA was involved in killing JFK. What? You know, all this stuff with people is it's like a paradigm shift, and then the money printing and all this. But have you ever heard of the rat hope experiment? I heard this on Timcast the other day. Have you ever heard of that experiment? It was when can you hear me? You're frozen. Test, test, test.
So
You there? I
should
lost
be
you.
good to go. I
I
hear it.
lost you for a second.
Yep. Do you
I
hear me
hear
though?
you now. Hey, we run the best Wi-Fi here. I can hear you
Okay.
again. Where
Yeah.
did I
No,
lose
so
you
the
at?
rat hope experiment. So
Yeah,
you
have you
just
heard that
asked me
one?
if I'd heard of the rat hope experiment. And so
Yep.
yeah, actually that's a brilliant analogy for the way things are going. But yeah, please
Yeah.
elaborate.
If you haven't heard of it, I'll probably do a video on it. But it the guy running the experiment puts the rats in the water, and they stop swimming within 15 minutes and drown. Puts one set of rats in the water, and then the next set of rats he puts in the water, and then he takes them out after 15 minutes, lets them rest, puts them back in the water, and then they swim for hours. So he does this over and over again, and he realizes that if they don't know that there's no end to the suffering, they'll stop swimming and drown. But if they have hope that they might be pulled out of the water, they'll swim for hours. And that's one of the things I think Bitcoin does. Is it gives people hope. Uh, at least it gives me. If you go to a Bitcoin conference and you interact with the people in the Bitcoin ecosystem, people who are into it, their heads are screwed on straight and they're into freedom. And they're very helpful people, and they want. I mean, perfect example. Um, they want to educate people about what's wrong with the system and how it can be fixed. And if you think like you do, how do you see the world? Okay, Bitcoin standard. I'm sure you've read The Price of Tomorrow, Jeff Booth book.
Mhm.
Um, with a deflationary money, you're going to have deflationary goods, which the deflation, in my opinion, the only people it hurts is the government
Yeah.
because they can't collect as many taxes. Which is, I always ask people, hey, if we're in a free market, and we have capitalism, which the goal of capitalism gives you better products cheaper. Why is everything more expensive?
Yeah.
Everything you need, housing, medical care, cars, they're all more expensive. Why? And so if you answer that question, then you'll get to the bottom of it. But what do you
Yeah.
see the world looking like with the deflationary money?
Well, that's really interesting. I'm actually talking with Jeff Booth. He and I and Robert Breedlove and Daniel Prince, Newt Van Home, we're doing for Orange Pill App. So I'm a partner in Orange Pill App. It's a Bitcoin social media company. And we're doing a Twitter Spaces this Saturday. So I'm actually going to talk to Jeff about this a little bit. And so I tweeted the other day, my book actually beat out. I quote Price of Tomorrow, his book, like 3 times in mine. It's a great read. It was like mandatory research for my book, and it like beat out his book on Amazon's bestseller by one place. And I'm like, this is so ridiculous, because like I should probably give him a commission for how valuable his information is, because yeah, that book's really helpful. I mean, it is one of those things. I mean, as a Bitcoiner, I read it as somebody that's been in Bitcoin for years and kind of thought through these things. But you read his book and he talks about deflationary, the very deflationary system. You're like, wow, it's frustrating. It actually becomes frustrating as you're reading, because you think about it. There's certain goods that we do see that in big screen TVs, right? When the first flat screen TVs came out, they were legitimately for a 40-inch flat screen TV, LCD or whatever, or what was it? A plasma screen. That's what it was. It was $15,000 for that TV when it came out in the early 2000s. And then today you can go to Walmart and get it for, you can get it 30 inches bigger. So you can get a 70-inch one for $400, and it's crystal clear, it's 4K and all these things. And so, yeah, certain things that are unaffected by government monetary policies, things that are pure technology, and they have, you know what the difference is? There's not a TV lobby. There's not a TV regulatory industry agency. There are agencies that regulate cars. There are agencies that regulate energy. There are things. Look at every industry that has higher prices and better technology. They have a regulatory agency behind them. If they don't, then the prices actually drop over time. So that's just a really easy rule of thumb. But yes, I think in a pure money standard, you're going to be incentivized. You know how we talked about earlier, it sounded bad that I was saying like, oh yeah, you know, I'm going to maybe spend my money on less things. Yeah, you're going to probably spend your money on less things because you're going to be financially incentivized to wait a little bit because you're going to be able to get a better version of it for a little bit cheaper. And so people are going to be in less debt. People are going to be financially better off, and you're going to get better and better things. It literally will lift people out of poverty just by continuing to exist. Less people will be living hand to mouth as long as they can make it another day. Every day that somebody lives, they will become wealthier and wealthier just by working, just by participating in the economy. I talk through this in my book a bit. I ask the question to the reader. I say, would you rather be poor today or the king from 500 years ago? Everybody says, I'd rather be the king from 500 years ago, especially young men. They'd be like, I would love the power and I would love having concubines, right? And so it's like, okay, let's think past the power and the concubines. What would you do for air conditioning in the summertime when it's hot? What would you do when it's freezing in the winter? What would you do to wash your clothes? I mean, maybe you have people wash your clothes, but you know, your clothes are never going to get that clean. What would you do for food? Guess what? You have the premier chef in all of the land, and he has like 3 different dishes that he can make because it depends on what's in season. You're not going to get Chinese food. You're not going to get Mexican food. You're not going to get any of those things. You don't have any of the amenities that we have today. You don't have music. You don't have television. You don't have the comforts that we have. I mean, literally, people that are poor today have smartphones and access to more information than the king did 500 years ago, than the emperor did 500 years ago. So the baseline amenities from deflation, from technology, make everybody wealthier and richer and access to more services and information and technologies just by continuing to live and exist for a little bit longer. So, I mean, I think it's a really optimistic thing, especially like you said, not if you're talking about the top line people. Think about the people that don't want this, the top line people, the elites, the people that have the money don't want this system to change. Everybody else will actually move up the economic ladder because there will be no more bottom rung to the economic ladder. There will not be people that are without those amenities because they will just be simply accessed by everybody because they will be so cheap. They will be so, you know, commonplace that nobody won't have them. You want to test this theory? Go ask a homeless person to borrow their phone and they will pull out an Android phone and they will let you use their smartphone. And that's somebody that's living on the streets right now.
Yeah. I think, you know, the world's a complicated place. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about Bitcoin because you never know, you know, in the fiat world, the Wizard of Oz, aka the Federal Reserve, and all the central banks. I tell people, look who doesn't like Bitcoin. There's some people that don't understand it, and maybe they do, and they're like, I don't know if I like it. But a lot of people that don't like it, central bankers, people at the World Economic Forum, one of the number one ways they control people is through currency because what do you work for? How do they control your time? How they can control your bank account. It's a central point of failure to control the populace. And this is really a grassroots movement. If you look into the Bitcoin community and you look at the Bitcoin protocol, um, and I encourage people like have an open mind because you need to have hope. And Bitcoin's one of those few things that does give me hope for the future. It's something that cannot be stopped. Unlike gold, which is why we have paper money in the first place. Um, if you're a gold bug, I get it. But the reason we went from gold to paper money is because gold's how you buy a cup of coffee with gold. You just like salt bathe gold dust on the, you know, the counter. It's not going to work, and so it's not a really you cannot have an economy of scale with gold. And Bitcoin, you can literally run a parallel economy of scale with Bitcoin. And I know you. I'm going to link your channel in the description. I've seen you do Lightning transfers on your channel, which is pretty damn cool.
That's funny because I was going to ask you if you want to do one right now for your audience. So
yeah, I can't. Well, my phone's my camera, so
yeah, so we'll do it next time.
Yeah,
we'll figure out a way.
But I'll link his videos so you can see it. But Lightning payments, like you may think that you get money instantly in the banking system today, but that's not in your account. That's what it says pending.
Yeah.
So that's what's unique about Bitcoin and Lightning. Um, and I do think it's a technology. If you're skeptical, I definitely think you should look into it. Um, Brian, do you have any parting words? I don't want to keep you all night.
Well, no, I mean, it is a great conversation. One of the things I'll say, and just to help illuminate what you said for your listeners about how money goes, it says pending in your bank account, or it's not physical. So when Bitcoin transfers, it settles. Now think about, there's a difference between an approval and a settlement. And so that's exactly what you were just saying. But just for the audience, when you go, you go to the gas station and you swipe your credit card, you get an instant approval in seconds, right? Well, that's basically just your financial institution telling another financial institution that Brian has the money. Don't worry, he's good for it. So we're kind of dealing with the system of IOUs. The transfer is going to be initiated, and then it's going to take 48 to 96 hours for that transfer. I actually run a chain of little brick and mortar businesses. We have to wait 2 business days. And so that means if I sell something on Thursday, I actually don't get it until Monday. This last week was a holiday. So I sold stuff on Thursday, didn't get any of our transactions until Tuesday because it was a holiday. So we were waiting like 96 hours for that money. We're waiting on as much as like 16% of our revenue at any given time. And so we got an approval, but settlements when it actually lands in the account. With Bitcoin, when you get a transfer, there's no such thing as an approval. It's just a settlement. You're literally just settling it. It's called cash final. It's just the same as if you handed me $20. It's happening in real time, but it's happening electronically. Now, what's the incentive for banks to take all that time with that transfer? They just messaged that person A has the money to go to person B. So why doesn't that ledger transfer happen immediately? It's because they're making interest on holding those funds. Now, you think that sounds crazy. Oh, how much money could you make by holding a few dollars for 48 hours? These financial institutions don't just hold a few dollars. They hold trillions of dollars that they get to make interest off of just by holding that money for small periods of time. It's called a float. They get to float that money, hold it, make interest on it for doing nothing other than saying, oh, don't worry, it's pending, it's coming, it's coming. The only difference is once they released the funds, they just said, okay, it's good now. Nothing else happened. All they needed to do was that initial approval, but they're waiting for that so they can make those sweet interest dollars.
Yeah, Visa, MasterCard, Amex, they're going to be dinosaurs in our lifetime. I tell people, obviously banks don't care about you, but look at stadiums, look at the high rises in all these big cities. What name is on it? It's always a money institution of some kind, investing, banking, what have you. And there's a reason for that. And they're playing a game. They're playing a shell game with your money, and it doesn't benefit you in the slightest. It used to be different. Like a lot of people, think, well, a bank loans out money from my deposit. I'm like, no. No. They did not do that. But yeah, I think, like I said, I think Bitcoin is one of the most interesting. I didn't get into it deeply until 2020 when I saw the stock market, going up and to the right, and everyone was at home. I was like, what in the
more productivity,
then,
right? No.
Yeah. So I was like, okay. And so I started reading about Bitcoin, and it is a rabbit hole. So I warn you, once you get started, it's hard to stop. But it does answer a lot of problems, in my humble opinion. And it's a great community to get involved with. And I want to thank you, Brian. Once again, I'll link his book in the description below. And Brian, if you want to stick around after I end the interview, I have a couple more things. But thanks for watching, y'all. Thanks for listening. We'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Hosts.